Hey everyone, we're back on the roof, which means I have a brand new video for you guys. And today's a special one because it's the first in the Fix Your Mix series. The series where I mix your music. And to kick off this first video, we have a submission from Glass Walls and his track Strong. So let's take a listen. Wow, what a great track to start off this series with. And honestly, it's already sounding good, so I just need to make small tweaks here and there. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna work on the kick, then bass, then main melodic element, and then from there the rest of the elements. And finally, I'll work on the vocals. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so just to make sure we're all on the same page, let me show you what plugins I have on the master. So I have a utility over here that is lowering the volume by 4 dB. Now, this is totally not necessary. It's just a relic of an old mastering chain. And by this point, it's just something that I'm used to having it on. So I don't want you to think like it's the secret sauce or whatever. You know what I mean? So it's totally not necessary. Next, we have Pro MB with my preset on. Then we have Maggie Q just boosting the highs a little bit, and then Pro Q3 boosting the highs again and cutting all of the low frequencies. Next we have a clipper. As you can see right here, it's not doing a whole lot, like it's not changing the sound in a big meaningful way. It's just catching those tiny rogue frequencies and clipping them. And finally we have a limiter. You can just copy these settings. But I have one final thing to add to this. So this is a plugin that I made, and it's a visual alternative to my Pro MB preset. As you can see, with cleaner visual representation with the numerical readouts. We have the same 5-band setup and everything, but I want to make sure this plugin does not replace Pro MB. It doesn't compress or do anything to the audio. It's simply for metering. So I'm just going to use it alongside Pro MB in these videos because I think it makes it easier to understand exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to these settings and these specific targets and values that we need to hit. So yeah, if you can get Pro MB, I cannot recommend it enough. It's a great multiband compressor. And as you will see in the video, it has a lot of uses for it. I'm also using it on the mastering and everything. So yeah, if you can get Pro MB, absolutely do it. And you can also use it with my preset. So yeah, I'm also going to create a long form video about my plugin, going into the nitty gritty and all the details. But yeah, for now, I'm just going to use it in these videos. And if you want to use it with me, you can get it for free at the link in the description. Yes, you can get it for absolutely free. However, I did include the option to leave a donation. It's not necessary, but if you want to leave even $1, that would be appreciated. But once again, it's not necessary, so if you want to get it for free, you can do so at the link in the description. Okay, so here's how the kick sounds. Okay, so as you can see here, we have a lot of mud and barely any high frequencies. But that's not a problem. This is something we can fix very easily with EQ. The real issue of this kick is its pitch curve. It just sounds too soft. It's missing that hard punch, you know, that iconic trance boom that you usually get. So currently it just sounds very soft and undefined. So instead of using it, we're just gonna make our own kick from scratch. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna set our length. So we're gonna go with 1/8, which in 140 BPM, that translates into 215 milliseconds. So we're gonna set it to that. We're going to also make sure that we go over here and set this all the way up. This is essentially gonna make it so that we're getting the full spectrum of the pitch down. Just pull it all the way up. And now we're going to set our pitch curve starting with the two endpoints. So the first point is going to be set all the way to the top, which means that the sine wave is going to start pitching down all the way from the top from 20 kilohertz. This is crucial in order to get all of these high frequencies, because if we started lower, then you can see that we're losing all of these high frequencies. So we want to start from the very top. And then the other endpoint, usually I set it to the root note. So if your track is in the key of F, you would set it to F1. But because this track is in the key of C sharp, which is a very problematic key, there's a reason why not a lot of tracks use C sharp. The reason for that is because if we set it to C sharp 1, you will hear that this sounds terrible because it's pitching too low. But if we set it to C sharp 2, then you're going to hear that it's going to sound equally terrible because it's too high. You can hear how it sounds almost like a tom. That's because we're getting into that tom snare area. So we don't want to set it too high and we don't want to set it too low. So usually what I would do is probably go down to like B. But the reason why I set it to A1 is because this track has different chords. So that means that the bass is playing different notes. So if we want the ability to be able to transition smoothly between the kick and the bass, we have to find some sort of a middle ground in order to be able to blend into different bass notes. So for example, if we set it to B1, but then the bass is playing F sharp, it's gonna make it very difficult for us to blend the bass in this section. So when I say blend, I'm talking about having no phase issues and blending both of the kicks waveform and the bass waveform, making it sound and look as one continuous wave. So that would be very difficult. That's why I chose this middle ground of A1. Okay, so now let's move on to the other two middle points. This one is at the 1024th mark, and it's set to A4. So this point right here controls the click and also the transition between the click into the punch. So if you were to set it higher, you would get more click. And the same thing happens if you place it later, you will get more click. And once again, this doesn't have to be perfect. So if you place it a little bit over here, a little bit over there, like it really doesn't matter. So you can mess around and find the sweet spot that works for you. But I think for this is working well. And the other point is going to be placed at the 164th mark, which is 27 milliseconds. And I'm placing it on F3. Now, this looks a little bit awkward because usually what you would want is something that looks like this. But the reason why I have it at F3 and not lower is because I want to have that signature trance laser boom. So watch what happens if I bring this lower. We totally lose all the boom. And if I bring it back and exaggerate it like so, you can hear how we're getting more of that boom over that laser, that So I think this is the perfect place. This is usually where I would put those points. But once again, feel free to experiment with whatever values you think sounds best to you. And before we move on to the next and final part, which is the amp curve, I want to address the fact that we have a little bit of distortion going on. So I have wave type with 24% distortion and 50% mix. And I have the drive set to 60%. Now, this doesn't do a lot, just gives it a little bit of character. So it's really not necessary, but you can add it to get a little bit of that tone. Okay, now for the amplitude curve. And in order to talk about this, I need to explain how this relates to two things. One is Pro MB and my plugin over here. The way you want to think about the amplitude curve, think about it as an EQ that adjusts the volume of your kick as it's playing. So if I were to zoom over here, you can see how this point, this initial point, controls the high frequencies. If I were to turn it down, you would see that we are actually turning down the volume of the high frequencies. And if we were to bring it back up, you can see we're bringing the volume back up of those higher frequencies. And each point controls a different frequency region. So this would control some of those mid frequencies. So this is how you want to think about it. Less in terms of controlling volume, but more in a sense of using this as an EQ. And we're going to use it as an EQ in order to hit the targets that we need to hit in Pro MB and in my plugin over here, which is going to make it way easier to actually see what we're talking about. So the targets for a trance kick are going to be 2 dB below the threshold for the first band, 0 dB for the second band, so right on the verge of triggering the compressor, and then 2 to 4 dB over the threshold in band number 3, and the target for the other two bands is going to be 6 dB over the threshold. So we're going to use this amplitude curve in order to hit those targets, but since we're applying distortion after kick 2, we also need to take into consideration the distortion that we're adding over here. But before we get to Saturn 2, let me show you where I set those points for the amplitude curve. So we have 100% at the very beginning, and then we have 40% at the 1/512th mark, and then we have 30% at the 1/16th mark, and then we have 0% at the very end of our 1/8 length. So this is our amplitude curve, and essentially what it's going to do is going to make it that we're boosting all of the high to mid frequencies into the distortion, the multiband distortion that we're going to add right now, and we're going to get less distortion at the lower mids and subs over here. So now that we explained this, let's open Saturn 2 and we're going to use a multiband distortion. The reason why we're going to use a multiband distortion is because we only want to saturate and distort the higher frequencies. We don't want to mess with the lower frequencies. That's why I have it here where it's bypassed. And we're only going to apply distortion to the higher frequencies. I'm going to set the crossover at 659 Hertz, which is E5, as you can see right here if we were to open Pro Q3 and look. So essentially, we're only distorting from this part and upwards and keeping the rest of these frequencies intact. And for this, I'm using the worm tube, but you can experiment with different kinds of distortions. And I have the drive set all the way up to 100%. And since the distortion is going to mess with our volume, I'm going to raise it by 10 dB, as you can see here. And another important thing, we're going to set the crossover to 24 dB per octave slope, so we're getting a much cleaner separation between the two. If this were to be at 12 dB or lower, then you're going to have much more bleed. That's why it's important to have it at 24. And this is how it sounds without the distortion. As you can hear, the click, the attack of the kick sounds a little bit plasticky, but listen to how it sounds with the distortion. So we're making it sound a little bit more dirty, a little bit more harsh, but in a good way. We're giving it a little bit more edge. And once again, as I've said before, you can feel free to experiment with whatever sounds good to you. For example, if you lower this crossover like so, you're going to get more of a techno-ish sound. So yeah, I would say experiment, but also be careful not to go overboard and change the sound completely. But now, since the distortion added a little bit unwanted frequencies, and also in order for us to hit those targets that we set for ourselves, we're going to open an EQ and we're going to shape the sound and make sure that we're actually hitting those targets over here. So currently we can see that we have a 10 dB boost over here where it should be 0. So that's the first thing that I'm going to tackle with this. And since we know that this band controls the 150 to 550 Hertz, I'm going to make a bell EQ like this. And I'm gonna put it right here at A#4, which is close to our point over here at A4. So making sure that we don't have a buildup around these frequencies right here between our transition from click into punch and body. And after messing around with it for a while, I landed on these settings, as you can see right here. So now if I go back to our plugin over here, this should say 0 dB. As you can see right here. By the way, this doesn't have to be perfect, so don't even stress about it. You know what I mean? Like 0.dB here, 0.dB there, like it's not gonna make a difference at all. So this is good enough for me. And also by this one move, which also eats up a little bit of the frequencies over here at the 100 Hertz, we also made it sure that we're hitting the target for band 1, which is -2. So we killed 2 birds with 1 stone. And also it seems like we were able to reach our target of 2 to 4 dB over the threshold for band number 3, so that's good as well. Now for the other two, we can see that in band number 5 we have 10 dB of highs where it should be only 6 dB. So we're gonna tackle this by doing a high cut like so. And now when I play it, as you can see, it's closer to 6 dB. This one is at 5 dB. You can go ahead and maybe add something like this, maybe around so, adding like 2 dB. And yeah, I think this is perfect actually. As you can see, we're hitting all of our targets, and this is how it sounds with and without it. So yeah, look at this beautiful shape right here. We have the highs at the very beginning, and then we have a dip around the 500 Hertz range. And then we have this beautiful low-end body, just a beautiful shape. So yeah, this is our trance kick. Now I'm just gonna freeze and flatten it. So I'm gonna duplicate it over here just so we have a backup. I'm gonna disable all of these plugins and I'm gonna bake it into audio just to be on the safe side. Also, another important tip is to always disable the warp since we don't need it, and usually it can cause some problems within Ableton. And now let's compare both of our kicks. So the original kick sounds like this. And this is how our kick sounds. Now, one last thing that I want to do is usually in trance kicks, they add some sort of like a noise layer or a hi-hat or a snare of some sorts to add a little bit more of crisp highs. And this is something that the original kick has. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the original kick. I'm going to make sure it doesn't interfere with our click. Do something like this and then add an EQ to it and remove all of the lows. Something like this, and I'm gonna layer it with our kick, and this is how they sound together. Yeah, I think this sounds good. Okay, one last thing before we move on to the bass. Yesterday, after I was done recording, I was messing around a little bit and I had the leads layer playing. And all of a sudden, I noticed that there's a problem with our kick. There's this tiny frequency that was sticking out. And my approach to surgical EQ is to not do anything unless the problem presents itself, you know? So we're not doing stuff like this, looking for problems. If there is no problem, then there is no problem. You know what I mean? But if you hear something, then you start looking for it. So let me show you what I heard. So as you can see, I lowered it by 6 dB. Okay, so here's how the original sub bass sounds like. And you can see right here that the second and third harmonic are super quiet, as well as the rest of the harmonics. And I'm assuming that's because they had a high cut, which the way they had it set up was eating into those harmonics, as you can see right here. So it's really important to pay attention to the Q factors and where you put the cutoff. But honestly, that's not an issue. We can fix it very easily with EQ. But I'm not gonna do that because there's another issue with this bass. As you can see right here, it only plays after the first 1/8, creating an offbeat bass. The problem is that we're creating a hard separation between the kick and the bass. And while sometimes it's desirable, I think in this case, it will be better to actually blend the kick and the bass together. So have the bass play around here where the kick is and then transition slowly as we blend the two together. I think this is something that a lot of people don't actually understand. And it's something where if you actually look at a lot of big artist tracks, you will see that even if the track has this offbeat bass, it's not actually offbeat. And this is actually something that you can research yourself. If you take like a big artist track that has an offbeat bass, and if you were to high cut everything below C2, you will see that the actual waveform is not separated. It's one continuous waveform. So even though it sounds like an offbeat bass, like there's a separation between the kick and the bass, there's actually no separation at all. So yeah, I think it's something that a lot of people don't actually know. So because of that, we're just going to make our own bass from scratch. Okay, so I'm going to create a MIDI node just like this. As you can see, we're starting from the very beginning. So now I'm going to open Serum 2, and this is what I already made. Basically, what I did was just to add a basic sine wave, lower the random phase all the way down, and then I clicked this little button right here to go into the wave editor. And what I did was just add the second and third harmonic. And now this doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to fix everything with an EQ later, but I just went and added them into the wavetable. So now we have the three most important frequencies of a bass. Everything else doesn't really matter because it doesn't carry weight as those initial three. So currently I don't need those upper harmonics. We're gonna get them from other layers like this mid bass layer and this other mid bass layer. So I don't really need those harmonics for the sub bass. I only need those three. So yeah, now we have our sub bass in Serum, but I want to show you one little cool trick that will help us to blend between the kick and the bass. I'm gonna go to LFO1. I'm going to set it to envelope, and I'm going to create this shape like a ramp down, and I'm going to set the rate to 1/8. And now if we go here to the matrix tab, you can see that I have it on the global main tuning and set it to unipolar. And currently I believe I have it set to 3 semitones. So if you click 3 ST, that's going to set it to 3 semitones, which is going to represent it as 2%. That's because Serum has a weird way of converting semitones into percentages. And by the way, I believe that it's not the same as just typing 2%. I don't know why that is, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. Now what that's going to do is going to make it that our waveform will start from 3 semitones up and will pitch down to the normal pitch after 1/8. And the reason why I have it to 1/8 is because the initial 1/8 is where the kick is playing. So we're actually helping the bass blend with the kick, because as the kick is pitching down, so does us our bass. So it's going to make it way easier for us to have it like this, where it's one continuous waveform. So yeah, that's a cool little trick. So yeah, we're done with Serum. Now there's one little thing that I'm going to do, which is add stereo to the sub bass. Yes, believe it or not, we're going to add a little bit of stereo information into this mono bass that will help us achieve a much more fuller track, a much more wide track. And I know this is a somewhat controversial topic for some reason, because people think that, oh, you're supposed to mono everything below 150 hertz, which is totally not true, by the way. The only thing that matters when it comes to mono compatibility, if you're going to play your track at clubs, is mono compatibility. So it doesn't matter if you have stereo information at like 30 hertz, 40 hertz, 50 hertz, as long as it's mono compatible, meaning when you collapse everything into mono, which that's what those club systems do. They collapse everything into mono. If it sounds good after it's being collapsed into mono, meaning that it's mono compatible, then you're all good. No need to worry about having stereo information below 150 hertz if it's mono compatible. And this is how we're gonna get it. As you can see, I made a group and I duplicated the channel into two signals. So one is gonna be our mono signal, which is gonna be just the regular signal, making sure that it's mono, set to mid. And the other one is gonna be our stereo layer, and we're gonna achieve that stereo by having a delay plugin and delaying the left channel by 6.69 milliseconds. So that's gonna give us a separation between the left channel and the right channel, creating stereo information. And then we're gonna add an EQ and we're gonna remove the fundamental from the stereo signal. So we're only left with the second harmonic and the third harmonic. So since this bass is playing a B note, we can see right here that this is the fundamental at B1. We're gonna remove it a bit by going to G2. The reason why I don't set it to C or C sharp is because I want to make sure that I'm actually removing that fundamental while also not removing anything from the second harmonic. So I think G2 is a good balance. And then after that, just to make sure that this signal is stereo, we're gonna put it in 100% side information. So let's listen to how it sounds. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to lower the volume by 12 dB of the stereo signal. So we're just adding a little bit of stereo information. And in order to test it and see that it's actually mono compatible, here's what we're going to do. We're going to solo the mono channel and we're going to look here at span and see that everything looks okay. And then I'm going to uncheck this button, which will add the stereo information channel. And you will see that it stays at the same level, even though we're collapsing everything to mono over here. So look at this. This is the mono signal, the pure mono signal, and this is with our stereo layer. And this is how the stereo layer looks on its own. So as you can see, we're adding just a little bit of stereo information, not a lot. Now the next move will be to actually balance those three frequencies, and for that I'm going to add two instances of Pro Q3, and then I'm going to add MV Meter 2 and click this button, make sure that we're getting just a mono singular reading of the left and right channel. And now I'm going to open the second Pro Q. So I'm going to create 3 points, one for every frequency. So the first one is going to be at B1, second one is going to be at B2, the second harmonic, and the third one is going to be at F sharp 3. And I'm going to make sure that the Q of all those points is set to 10, and we're not adding or subtracting volume. We're just going to use them to measure our frequencies. So if we start with the fundamental, the first one, we can see that we're getting a reading of minus 2.3. So in order for this to show 0, which will be way easier for us to measure the rest of the frequencies, I'm going to offset the input level over here by 2.3 dB, and that's going to show it in 0 right here. Okay, so now you're probably asking, what is the perfect ratio for this bass note? How are we going to create the perfect balance between those three frequencies? So this is actually something that I've struggled with for years. So after researching hundreds of big artist tracks, looking at their bass and measuring and seeing everything, I came up with the perfect ratios for every bass note. And yes, every bass note will have a different ratio, a different balance between those three frequencies. So I've compiled all of this into a chart that you guys can use. If you want to use that chart, the link will be in the description so you can download right now and follow along. So after looking at the chart, I saw that the second harmonic needs to be 3.5 dB below the fundamental, and the third harmonic needs to sit 8 dB below the fundamental. So let's just measure the second harmonic and see where we're at. So as we can see right here, we're getting a reading of minus 2.4. So it means that we need to lower it by 1.1 dB. That's why we have our first instance of Pro Q. We're going to go to the second harmonic, make sure that the Q factor is set to 10, and we're going to set it to minus 1.1. And let's see if we're good now. Okay, so now we've hit the target of minus 3.5 dB below the fundamental. So we're going to move on to the third harmonic and let's see what kind of reading we're getting here. As you can see, we get a reading of minus 7.5 dB, which means that we're super close. We just need to lower it by half a dB. Just going to add a point right here and lower it by 0.5. Great, we've hit the target. And this is how our bass looks and sounds like. And of course, you can experiment with different ratios if you want to boost the second harmonic or lower the fundamental. Just be aware that you're going to have to compensate with the overall volume because that's our next step. Let me show you what we need to do in order to set the perfect levels for our kick and bass. So as you can see right here, our kick is already set to the perfect level. It's hitting all the targets that we wanted to hit. So this is going to be the level of the kick. We're going to keep it like so. Now what we're going to do is level our bass. And when it comes to the sub bass, the only band that matters is this band right here, the first band between 0 and 150 hertz. So we're going to look only at this band and we're going to look to place it at minus 4 dB. So 4 dB below the 0 line. As you can see right here, it's hitting 6.8 dB. So I'm going to boost it over here by so. And as you can see, we're hitting the minus 4 dB target. So now both of our kick and our bass are at the perfect level and you can clearly see it right here. We're getting this beautiful continuation of the waveform. There's a little dip right here and that's probably due to the phase of the bass and the kick that are clashing a little bit in this area, which we can fix right now. So if we were to cut everything above 65 hertz right here, we can get a better picture of the waveform. So all we need to do is to go to the bass and change the phase starting position. So let's try 140 and see how that looks. And as you can see, we made it better. So if we were to take this off now, let's see how the waveform looks. As you can see, much better. There's a small dip. Maybe we can tweak it to get it even better. Let's try 100. We're going to continue to go in that direction. Let's see if it's going to make it better. I actually like 140 better. This is our perfect position right here. And by the way, I forgot to touch on this, but I do have a shaper box over here, which sidechains the bass. As you can see, there's complete silence in the first 1/16th portion of the bass, and then it slowly transitions into the 1/8 area, and then it stays at 100%, and then dips at the last 132nd mark, creating a linear fade. This is gonna help separate each hit of the kick and bass. So if I were to put it like this, you won't get much separation between each hit. And you can see it clearly here in the waveform. That's why it's good to have that separation. As you can see, that little bit right here. And yeah, maybe we can push this a little bit here. Let's see if that makes a change. It does make a change. So yeah, we're done. We've made our bass, and this is how the kick and bass sound and look like. And now all it's left to do is repeat the process for every bass note. Just duplicate this channel so that every bass note has its own channel where you can process it and level it individually. Okay, so now we're going to tackle the third and final most important element in any track. We already tackled the first two, which are the kick and the bass. We already balanced them and leveled them perfectly. So now we're going to work on the third one, which is the main melodic element. And for this track, it's this leads layer, including those Trance supersaws. And now, honestly, there's nothing here for me to do. This is already well balanced. The only thing that I did was just lower the highs by 6 dB, as you can see right here. And that's because we already have 2 EQs over here on the master that are boosting the highs. So yeah, but it's not like it's a problem with the sound. It's not like Glass Walls did anything wrong. It's just a matter of different mixing approaches. So my mixing approach results in a darker mix, and that's because of the kick drum. So let me bypass all of the plugins on the master so you can hear how dark the kick sounds. So the reason why it sounds dark, as you can see right here, is because the way this is set, so if all of the 4 bands are hitting at the same target, so let's say plus 6 dB, then what that does, it creates a straight flat line going from 20,000 hertz down to 200 hertz. And the only reason we have a dip right here is because we didn't set these 2 bands to plus 6 dB like those 2 right here. But if we were, then that would have created a flat line, which makes it easier to balance and match visually, because naturally when you're creating kicks, you're gonna have these bumps and dips in the spectrum. So by having to balance it to a straight line to match it, it makes it so much easier. Rather, if we had to balance it to an upward diagonal line like so, this makes it so much difficult. So that's why I'm mixing and balancing to that flat line just for convenience sake. So it's not that it sounds better, it actually results in a darker sound, but that's actually not a problem because we can tackle it in the mastering stage by boosting the highs. So yeah, that's why. Now I want to make one more important note, which will explain more the mindset that I have today when it comes to mixing. You see, early on in the beginning, I had this mindset where my goal was to make every sound as beautiful as it can. And that mindset is a recipe for disaster, because when you're operating from that mindset of trying to make every sound as beautiful as possible, you end up making exaggerated bad moves and losing track of what actually sounds good versus what sounds bad. So that's why you ended up doing stuff like boosting the highs. But then you get addicted to those moves because it sounds better, it sounds prettier, and it actually sounds louder because brighter sounds sound louder to our ears. And we always equate louder with better. So that's how you get addicted to those moves. And slowly but surely, you're adding more dB and increasing the highs by more, little by little, until you find yourself boosting the highs by ridiculous amounts. We're doing stuff like removing problematic frequency areas like the 3K hertz area because this area sounds harsh to our ears, or removing the 150 to 550 hertz range because that's the muddy range. So just because these frequency areas are naturally problematic, it doesn't mean that we need to necessarily lower them or get rid of them entirely. But that's what you end up doing when you're operating from that mindset of trying to make everything sound better and prettier. Or here's something that everybody can relate to, like adding reverb to every sound just because reverb makes everything sound prettier and bigger and epic. So it took me years to realize the damage that I was doing and how bad this mindset is. And this is actually something that more mature producers understand. So today I'm operating from the mindset of how can I make this sound balanced within the mix instead of trying to make it sound pretty and good on its own. So the difference is, let's say you have a sound that has some high frequencies. Now if you're operating from the mindset of making every sound beautiful, then you will boost those highs. But just because that sound has high frequencies doesn't necessarily mean that those frequencies are important and should be boosted. So operating from the mindset of trying to make every sound balanced and sit well within the mix makes you ask questions like, hey, do I need those high frequencies? What is the role of this sound in the mix? What are the most important frequency areas of this sound that serve an actual purpose for me in the mix? And this changes and it depends on a lot of stuff, by the way. So for example, if you have a snare, let's say, usually the most important frequency areas of a snare are going to be the 150 to 550 hertz range. And that's because that's where the body of the snare is. And the other important frequency area of a snare usually is the high frequencies. So let's say the 7K and above, because that's where the attack and noise of the snare. So knowing that, it doesn't mean that we need to have those two areas balanced to the same level, or that the other frequency areas don't matter at all. It just means that now we know what matters and we can make moves based on that knowledge. But yeah, as I said, this doesn't mean that it's going to apply to every snare in every track. So let's say that these two frequency areas are important for our snare currently in this track that we're working on. But if we take the same snare and use it in a different track, it doesn't mean necessarily that those frequency areas would be important in that new track. Just because it's the same snare doesn't mean that we're using it in the same way and that it plays the same role in every single mix. So unfortunately, I can't tell you like always do this on snares, or always do that on hi-hats. It's gonna vary and depend on each sound in each track and whatever that role of that specific sound in that specific mix is. So yeah, I hope I managed to explain this point because it's a really important thing to understand. But yeah, with that being said, the only thing that is left to do is just level this leads layer within the mix. So yeah, this is how the leveling process works. I slowly raise the volume of the sound until it hits 0 in one of of those bands. And it doesn't matter which one. We only need one band to hit 0. And then once that happens, I stop. And that's our reference point. That's our baseline. And from there, we can level depending on how loud or quiet you want that sound to be within your mix. But the important thing is that we're starting from this baseline that is based on the most important frequency area of any sound. So we're not just leveling by the overall loudness of the sound, but rather on the most important frequency area of that sound. So let's see where the 0 line is for this sound. So yeah, I think somewhere around here. Now, what you probably noticed happened was that the sound was hitting a bit in an uncontrolled way. And that's actually something that there's nothing for us to do about. That's because of the nature of the sound. These are supersaws. And whenever you have a sound that has multiple voices and detunement, it's going to be a little bit unpredictable and a little bit unstable because all of those voices are going to phase out with each other and cancel each other at one point or another. So that's why you can see along the waveform, you're going to have those dips and peaks, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's just the nature of the sound, you know? So that's why when you're doing this, when you're leveling a sound like this, you're going to get a little bit of unpredictable results. So what matters to me is the overall general average of the volume. So I think around minus 4 dB for this sound is okay. So now we have our baseline for this sound. So let's hear how it sounds within the context of the mix. And based on that, we're going to either lower it or raise the volume. So let's see how it sounds. So yeah, I think this is actually a perfect place for it. It's not too loud, not too quiet. And usually my rule is that the kick is the only element that's supposed to go over this 0 line. It's the only element that's supposed to actually trigger the Pro and B compressors over here, as you can see. But once again, it's not like a hard rule. So if you have an element that sounds good 2 dB over that baseline and is triggering the compressors by 2 to 3 dB, I think that's okay, especially for the main melodic element. So yeah, we're done with our leads layer, but I forgot to mention that we also have a little bit of sidechaining going on right here, as you can see the curve. So yeah, there's one more point that I want to make very quickly. Because we have such a dark mix due to the dark kick that we have, and our goal is actually to balance and match everything to the kick. So the kick is dictating the overall sound of the mix. So because of that, I find myself not doing anything to basic sounds. So if you have basic sounds like supersaws, or if you're making basic sounds like this, then you don't need to do anything to these sounds. Like, I don't put any EQ on these types of sounds. I don't put a compressor. I don't distort them. I don't do anything to them. They already sound good because they already fit with our dark kicks. So it actually makes our life way easier. But of course, if you have complex sounds like this, then you're probably going to have to do a little bit of processing because you're changing the basic sound in such drastic ways. But if you're using basic sounds, basic waveforms, basic synthesis, you don't need to do anything. So yeah, that's a quick little tip right there. Okay, so now we're going to balance and level the rest of the sounds in the mix. And I don't want to say that these elements don't matter. They do matter, but not as much as the 3 main elements. So what that means is that we have more leeway, a little bit more room for error. So it's okay if you don't balance and level them perfectly because it's not going to matter since they're only supportive elements and not the main elements. So with that being said, we're going to tackle the mid-bass layers first. Let me just group them together, and then I'm going to copy this EQ over to this group. That's the EQ from our leads layer, just lowering the highs a little bit to compensate for the 2 EQs that we have over here on the master. And now the first thing that I'm going to do with the mid bass is I'm going to check that they're actually not clashing with our sub bass over here. So when our sub bass is playing B note, I want to make sure that our mid bass layers are not playing anything below F sharp 3. So as we can see right here, they are clashing with the sub bass a little bit. So what I'm going to do is just low cut those frequencies, and I'm going to automate the cutoff depending on the note that the bass is playing. So we're starting at B, and then I believe it changes to A, and then goes back to B again, and then C sharp. So I'm going to automate the cutoff accordingly. And once again, since these are supportive layers, it doesn't matter if it's in 0 latency. I know there's a lot of people that are going to be in the comments like, what are you doing? You're messing up the phase and whatnot, you know. But as I said, ultimately it doesn't matter. You're barely gonna hear these these mid-bass layers anyway. So now I'm going to balance this offbeat mid-bass. And the way I'm going to approach this is by asking, what is the role of this layer? So since it only plays on the offbeat, it's supposed to highlight and give us the feeling of an offbeat bass and kind of help us break away the pattern of the kick and bass. Because if you remember, this is how our kick and bass waveform looks like one continuous waveform. So having an offbeat bass playing here would help us get a little bit of separation, or at least of a faux separation, because they're not actually separated. Also, what it's going to do is going to help us fill in those upper harmonics on the sub bass, since the sub bass doesn't generate these frequencies. So that's going to help our sub bass translate to different systems and going to make it that the bass is not only felt but also heard on different devices, like if you're listening on your phone speakers, for example. So given that role that it has, and also given the fact that we have another mid-bass layer that plays multiple notes, not just the offbeat note, as you can see right here. So what I'm going to do is remove these high frequencies of the offbeat bass layer, and I think somewhere around here. What that's going to do is make room for the other high frequencies of this sound, but also it's going to create a separation between the two. And another thing, it's going to enable us to place it and level it way higher without those high frequencies, because if you remember, brighter sounds sound louder than darker sounds. So this is how it sounds with and without. And now we're going to move on to this sound. And honestly, I don't think I have anything here to do. This already sounds good to me, so I don't think anything else would be necessary. So what's left to do is just to level these two sounds. We're going to start with this layer with the offbeat bass. So remember, we're going to bring it to the point where one of these bands shows 0, and then we're going to decide from there if it's too loud or too quiet. So this is our bass line. As we can see, we're hitting the 0 mark in this band. So from here, we're going to listen to it within the context of the mix, and we're going to decide whether we want to boost it even more or lower its volume. And we can immediately tell that it's way too loud, so I'm going to lower it by 6 dB and see if that's good enough. And I think it's still too loud, so I'm gonna lower it by 4 dB. Yeah, I think around 4 dB is okay. Let's listen to it with the leads layer. So if you're listening carefully, you can definitely tell that it's there, but it's not super loud and in your face. So I think we're done with this layer. Now let's do the other one. As you can see right here, we're hitting the 0 mark on these two bands. And let's do the same thing and see how it sounds. I'm going to already lower it by 6 dB. And let's listen to it within the context of the mix. I think it's too loud, so we're going to lower it. Yeah, I think somewhere like here. So yeah, I think this is actually perfect right here. So yeah, we're done with those layers. Now we're going to move on to the drums. And once again, I'm just going to copy this EQ over here to the drums. And let's listen to how the drum sounds. And honestly, I don't think there's anything else left for me to do with these drums. They're already well balanced. Glass Walls did a really good job. So there's nothing here for me to do other than just level it within the overall mix. So as you can see, we hit it right there on the 5th band and on the 3rd band, which makes sense because this is where all of the hi-hats and cymbals and rides, and this is where the claps and stuff like that are living in. And so it makes sense that both of these would be balanced like so. So now we're just going to balance it within the mix. I think one small thing that I'm going to do is add a side chain just to remove this part. So we make sure to free up space for the kick transient right here. And we're going to create this kind of shape. And I think I'm going to ease up on the volume a little bit. So at 85%. So let's hear how this sounds. I think I'm gonna move it a little bit over here to sidechain less. Yeah, and I think I'm gonna lower this a little bit to 75%. And yeah, this is it. Okay, so now I went and mixed the rest of the elements, and let me show you what I did. So we have this effects layer. So I just added sidechain to it, as you can see right here, and also copy pasted this EQ from the other elements. And then I leveled it within the mix the same way I showed you. So it's really just about repeating the process with every single element. And this is how it sounds with the rest of the mix. And then I went ahead and balanced and leveled the last two layers that we have over here. So I just grouped these atmospheric layers and I just added the same EQ. But as you can see, I automated the gain. So it goes from minus 6 dB in the drop to minus 24 dB over here in this section. And that's just to create extra separation between the two segments and also to free up some space in the high frequencies for the vocal that's about to play in this section. So this goes actually with what I was saying earlier when it comes to this mindset when mixing. So just because in this area the high frequencies are important doesn't mean they're gonna be important in other sections of the track. So yeah, this is how they sound in the drop. And this is how they sound in this section. And here's how they sound within the context of the mix. So yeah, we're done with everything. Now the only thing that's left is the vocals. And when it comes to vocals and live recordings of instruments, it's really important to have a good recording. And unfortunately, live recording is not really my expertise. So there's people who know way more than I do about that, like what kind of mics you should be using and how to place them and everything. But I guess I can give you some general advice when it comes to recording. So I'm gonna have a list right here on the screen right now, so you can pause it and read it. And those are just really some basic rules when it comes to recording. But yeah, because it doesn't matter what you do after the fact inside the DAW. If the recording is not good, then you're not going to fix it afterwards. So it's really important to get a great recording. And in this case right here, we already have a great recording. They did a great job. So really, I don't have anything else to do to it. I just copied the same EQ with the same settings right here. And I think now what it's left to do is just level it within the mix. Now, the only issue that I have with the vocals in the original mix is that they were leveled a bit too loud to a point where it created separation between the vocals and the rest of the mix. Now, this is just a personal preference of mine, but I like it when the vocal sounds and feels like it's a part of the mix and it's sitting within the mix rather than sitting on top of the mix. But I get the desire to place the vocal as loud as possible because naturally we want the vocals to be heard and for the listener to understand each word that the singer is singing. But I think we can achieve the same effect while also making it sound and feel like it's a part of the mix instead of having this separation. So yeah, I'm gonna repeat the same process of leveling.
Here I am, now starting over. Found my way with a fresh new start.
So yeah, as you can see, we're hitting the 0 mark at around, I would say, minus 7 dB. So this is our baseline. So yeah, it makes sense also that this band would be the one to hit 0 dB first and be the loudest, since usually that's the most important frequency area for a vocal, especially for a female vocal. So yeah, now we're gonna listen to it with the context of the mix and we're gonna choose whether to boost it or lower it. So let's see how it sounds. Yeah, so I think I'm gonna keep it at minus 10 dB. I think either minus 10 or minus 9 dB is okay. And as you can hear, we can still understand the vocal, we can still hear it, but now it feels like it's sitting within the mix rather than sitting on top of the mix. So we're not getting that separation. I don't think necessarily that there's a problem even keeping it at minus 7 dB, even though that's not my personal preference. But yeah, so we're gonna keep it at minus 10. Okay, one more thing that I actually forgot to talk about. Probably noticed this layer right here and that's actually not a part of the original stems. This is just something that I thought would be good to add, like a good addition, and it's just a super saw, just like our super saws over here in this layer. And what it does, it just plays the bass notes of those super saw stabs that we have over here in the drop. And this is really a subtle thing, but because if you listen to the super saws and look over here under the analyzer, they're missing that note over here. So yeah, it's super subtle and it adds that little bit of power to the super saws. But let me know what you think, if you think that's a great addition or not. I'm gonna play it with the context of the entire mix, and you let me know down in the comments if you think that is a good addition or not. So yeah, I think I'm gonna keep it, even though I said earlier here with the mid bass that I don't want anything to interfere with our sub. I don't think this is gonna create any problems. Since it plays notes sporadically, as you can see right here, I don't think it's gonna be an issue. So yeah, that's just a small little thing. It's not necessary, but you know, sometimes those little things can add a little bit of extra zhuzh, if you know what I mean. Okay, so we finally arrived at the mastering stage. So first of all, let's hear how our mix sounds without any effects on the master. So as you can hear, it's a pretty dark mix, but it's a pretty stable one. And you can also see it from the waveform that everything has this uniformity to it. So there's no crazy peaks and stuff like that. Usually that's a sign of a good mix. So first thing that we have here is Pro MB with my preset on. So we just have it here where it compresses each band by 6 dB. And if you remember, the way we mixed things was that the kick is the loudest element and it's going to be the main driving force for this compression. So every time the kick hits, the compressor is going to compress everything down, which is going to make our track sound more cohesive and glue everything together in a nice way. But now I also have another use case for it. So you can use this plugin in 3 ways. You can use it for metering, you can use it for multi-band compression, and you can use it also as an EQ. As you can see right here, I'm lowering the first band by 2 dB and I'm lowering the second band by 7 dB. The reason for that is because every track is going to need a different amount of low end, and the reason for this is if you want to get a loud master, usually the first thing you're going to have to sacrifice is low end. So you really have 2 choices when it comes to mastering. It's either keep your heavy low end but lose a little bit of loudness, or reduce a little bit of the low end to gain some loudness. And as with everything, it's a preference. So I can't tell you like, yeah, always do this. It really comes down to what you're aiming for. So yeah, for this, I decided to lower the low end a little bit so we can gain a little bit more loudness at the end. And for this band, this is usually where the muddy and boxy frequencies are at. So usually I lower this by 5 dB, but since I lowered this one by 2 dB, I wanted to keep that ratio between them. So I decided to lower this a little bit more. So this is how it would usually sound like. And this is how it sounds after lowering those frequency areas. So yeah, you can really hear how problematic this frequency area is. So yeah, feel free to experiment and use whatever sounds best to you. One last little thing that I want to talk about is I'm using oversampling, as you can see right here. And when it comes to linear phase and oversampling and all of those stuff, I'm not really an expert when it comes to those things. I know a little bit about those stuff, but essentially the way I look at it is if it makes it sound better, then use it. If it makes things sound worse, then don't use it. But if you don't notice the difference with and without it, then it's probably safe to leave it on anyway. I just like approaching these kinds of stuff in a very practical way. So if it works, cool. If it makes things worse, don't use it. If you don't hear the difference, just leave it on if you want to. Next thing we have is Ozone Imager, and we're splitting the spectrum into 2 parts, and we're boosting the stereo by 15% at the 650 hertz and above, just making the track a bit more wider while not messing with the lower frequencies. So yeah, here's with and without, and it's very subtle. So yeah, feel free to experiment with whatever sounds best to you. I think 15 is okay for this. Next thing we have is Suv 2, and what it does, it just catches those tiny rogue frequencies that are sticking out and taming them a little bit. And also we're telling Suv 2 to not do anything to the frequencies below 200 Hertz. So we're keeping the lows as is, not touching them at all. And this is how it sounds. So yeah, moving on, we have Mag EQ4 boosting the highs right here. And we also have Pro Q3 boosting the highs as well by 5 dB, as you can see right here. And also cutting a little bit of the lows right here. Now, this is a controversial move. I know a lot of people are going to be mad and angry and going to call me all kinds of names. But once again, the way I approach these kinds of stuff, if it makes it sound better, use it. If it doesn't, don't use it. The reason why I like using it sometimes, and it really depends on the track, is not so much to get rid of the frequencies below this range, but more to accentuate the low end a little bit and give it a little bit of boost because of the 24 dB octave slope and the Q factors you can see right here. What it does, it just creates a little bit of a boost, but sometimes it works and it makes the low end a little bit more tight and gives it that nice edge, and sometimes it makes it worse. Then we have this clipper right here, and what this does is very subtle, just getting rid of all of those tiny rogue transients so they won't accidentally trigger the limiter. So this is just a safety net. It's not really used in a way to achieve aggressive clipping, but the way you set the ceiling right here is important, so let me show you. So I have LFO tool over here, and I'm just going to use it as an oscilloscope to show you what's going on. So the way you want to set it is by lowering the ceiling until you reach this point right here, the bass area. So as you can see for this track, it's around minus 24 dB. So this is where it starts clipping into this area. And now after you set it, you just lower it by 4 dB. So if this is minus 24 dB, we're going to set it to minus 20 dB. So yeah, as you can see right here, we're creating this 4 dB headroom and we're clipping only the stuff below that. And then we have Serum 2 right here, and I'm using it to saturate different frequency areas of the track to add a little bit more color and tone before we hit the limiter. As you can see the settings right here, this is for the first band, this is for the second band, and this is the third band. So yeah, it's very subtle, just a little bit of color. And then finally we have the limiter over here. So this is the settings, as you can see. And the way this is set up is to ensure the fastest possible response to the incoming audio in order to ensure more accurate limiting. So essentially what we want the limiter to do is to quote unquote clip the transient right here and the rest of the peaks over here. So something like this, but of course in a transparent way and not in an aggressive, distorted way. So the way we're going to achieve that is by aiming to get between minus 4 to minus 10 dB of gain reduction. You can see in this case that we're getting about minus 5 dB of gain reduction. And I'm also adding a little bit of light clipping right here just to get a little bit of extra squeeze out of that lemon. And also you can see right here that I'm setting my ceiling to minus 0.2 dB. And I know that people have different opinions and different approaches when it comes to these type of stuff. So setting this to a lower value would actually defeat the purpose of trying to make your track as loud as possible. And even if you set it to minus 0.5 dB, even though that might sound like a subtle change, it actually is very noticeable from my experience. So yeah, that's it. We're done with the limiter. We're done with the master. And as you can see, this results in us getting to minus 4.6 LUFS, which I think is the standard. And I know this statement is going to trigger a lot of people because of course it depends on the genre, it depends on the track and whatever. But I think that around minus 5 LUFS is the standard. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can research this yourself, you know, just take whatever big artist track that you think sounds good and see whatever LUFS they're getting. And from my experience looking at other big artist tracks from various genres, some of them are hitting minus 6, some of them are hitting minus 5, some of them hitting minus 4 LUFS, and some even hit minus 3 LUFS, which is insane. So yeah, I think around minus 5 is the standard. And one more thing, if we open a spectrum analyzer, we can see that we're getting this shape right here. here, which once again, you know, it depends on the genre and track and all that stuff, but I feel like this is the standard shape, as you can see right here. And just for the sake of comparison, I've loaded up the original mix, and as you can see, the shape is pretty much the same, but the only noticeable difference that I see is that we have way more energy over here in the 400-500 hertz range, which is usually the muddy and boxy frequency range. And as you can see in our track, there's a dip right here. And also the other thing that is missing in the original track, as you can see, there's barely no bass over here. You can distinctly make out the first 3 harmonics of the bass in our version, but you don't see them at all in the original mix. So I think these are the two major differences between the two versions. And if we look at the original mix right here, we can see that it's hitting around -6 LUFS. So we also managed to make it a little bit louder. But yeah, that's it. And now here's the results. And now here's the final result. So I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, but my opinion doesn't matter here. I sent my mix to Glass Walls and here's what he had to say about it. As you can see, he loved it and only mentioned the volume of the vocals as a minor problem, which is fair and easily fixable. So what do you guys say? Did we do it? Did we fix this mix? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I've had a blast working on this track, so thank you to Glass Walls for sending it, and if you want to submit yours, just check the description. But yeah, I also want to thank everyone who made it this far into the video. I really want to know what you think because your feedback is super valuable to me, and since I'm taking this video by video, I can actually implement your feedback in the next video. So thank you all, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!